Do you ever feel like it should just be easier to use the best photo editing techniques? Adobe has added so many fancy new features to make things easy in Photoshop that it blows my mind that the photo editing techniques that actually give the best results are still the most complicated ones to do. But that's why I came up with an easy way to use these techniques, and in just the last 9 months alone, over 3,500 photographers have already started using it to take their photos to the next level. So in this video I'll show you what it is, the kinds of photos it works on, and how you can use it to improve your editing and create stunning results. To start, let me show you how to avoid committing one of the biggest photo editing sins that can easily creep into any photographer's images. Because one of the best things about editing in Photoshop is the ability it gives us to build up lots of small edits and adjustments gradually over time with the use of adjustment layers. And why is that a good thing? Well, it's because that's how you can create subtle and natural looking results. Trying to get all your editing done in too few steps is like handing someone a paint roller and a tin of emulsion and asking them to come up with the Mona Lisa. Whereas building up a lot of small adjustments over time gives you more precision, control, and flexibility over your creative choices. But this gradual approach also opens you up to a mistake that's very easy to make. If you're not paying close attention, many tiny unnoticed issues can build up into one big image quality destroying issue by the end. So take this set of adjustments for example. This end result has shadows that are virtually black, overexposed highlights that have lost all the detail, and you can kind of see where the other adjustments have been brushed into the image. Now I have used an example where these issues are easy to see in the video, but when the problem is more subtle, that's even worse because you're more likely to miss them until it's too late and you've either shared the images online or you've spent time, money and effort having them printed. So how can you solve this problem? Well, most edits and adjustments look best when applied to different areas of your photo in different amounts. And the thing that often decides what these best areas are is the brightness of those areas. For example, a contrast adjustment might look amazing across 80% of an image, but it can also make the darkest shadows look too dark and overexpose the brightest highlights. So you can partially solve that by masking the adjustment out of those badly affected areas by brushing into its layer mask. But then that can still introduce the awkward problem of making your brushstrokes look visible in the image, especially when you need to get right up close to a detailed edge with the brush. So you're either going to go over the edge or you're not going to go close enough to it, and either way the brushstrokes become visible and obvious. So what you need is a way to accurately brush into those areas where the brush only affects the brightest areas or the darkest areas, and the problem is that Photoshop makes it really complicated to do this. Now I could show you the long way of doing it, but I've got other videos on my channel that do that. So instead, I'll show you how to shortcut that entire complicated process with a Photoshop plugin that I made, and which you can download in the link in the description and pin comment for free. But it's probably best to wait until the end of the video before you do that, because I'm going to show you some really cool image enhancements you can make with it next. First though, let me show you how to make your regular adjustments super accurate so you can avoid these problems that I showed earlier in just a couple of extra clicks. So if you already know the adjustment that you want to make should only be added to, say, the bright areas or the dark areas, then start by clicking one of these buttons to load a selection that picks out those areas. Now this bar on the plugin, it lets you make a selection ranging from the darkest shadows on the left to the brightest highlights on the right. So a -1 selects the shadows in the image, a -5 selects only the very darkest shadows. So let's click the -1 button to load a shadows selection. And then next I could add any adjustment layer, but for this example, I'll add a curves adjustment layer. And now that curves adjustment layer's mask effectively has the shadows selection loaded straight into it, which means the adjustment will affect only the shadows instead of the whole image. And that's great for if you want to make shadows brighter, for example, like this. Alternatively, if you want an adjustment that adds saturation, say to the brighter areas of your image without saturating the dark areas, you can click one of the highlight selection buttons in the plugin, and then add a hue saturation adjustment layer, increase the saturation, and see how it's now only getting applied to those light areas. Now this is already some pretty powerful stuff, made a lot easier than if you wanted to do it without the plugin. But now let me show you how to take it to the next level in just a couple of extra steps, so you can prevent even more of those nasty editing errors that I mentioned, like clipping shadow and highlight details when adding other adjustments like a contrast adjustment, for example. So let's say we want to recover those lost shadows. The first step is to load a shadow selection from the left side of the plugin, just like before. And now this time I only want to select the very darkest areas because those are what I want to fix. So I'll use the -5 button. Now here's the cool part. we're going to treat this selection like a stencil that we can spray paint through, so the paint only goes into those darkest areas. But we're not going to be painting into the image, we're going to be painting into the layer mask with a black brush to conceal the curve's effect on the image. And now this removes the extra contrast from those darkest areas without removing it from anywhere else, because A, we're not brushing anywhere else, and B, even if our brush does paint over the lines into some lighter areas, the stencil prevents it from going there. So that fixes the busted shadows. What about the highlights? Well, we do the exact same thing, only first we make a highlight selection with the plugin, and then brush into the image where we want to conceal the contrast in the overexposed highlights. Now this works for absolutely any kind of photo where you need to make selective adjustments like this, from landscapes to wildlife, portraits, drone photography, the list goes on. And that's how you can improve the quality of the adjustments that you're already making to your photos. Now let me show you a cool trick that you can do to improve the results of a popular effect that you might not yet be using. The autumn effect is an effect that adds a nice glow to a landscape photo, but there's a problem with using it straight out of the box, which is that it also adds a lot of contrast, and you saw what happens to shadows and highlights when contrast goes too far. Now the standard way of preventing that is to reduce the whole effect until the worst looking part looks good. But the thing is that also then reduces the effect in the parts that already looked great. So let me show you a better way to fix it. To start, here's how to create the autumn effect. If you only have a background layer, then first duplicate that, and that's what we're going to work on. Or if you've made one or more adjustments already to your image, then you can start the process by pressing Ctrl, Alt, Shift, and E on Windows, or Command, Option, Shift, E on a Mac. Now click on the new layer, or your background copy if that's what you did, and then add a Gaussian blur filter. Then change the blend mode of this layer to overlay. Now that you have your standard autumn effect, what we're going to do to fix the overdarkened shadows, which is usually what happens mostly, then just load a highlight selection in the plugin, and then click on the autumn layer, and then add a layer mask to it, and watch how much more naturally blended it looks, because we're now restricting this autumn effect just to the highlights. Now let me ask you a question. Have you ever photographed a sunrise or sunset and had a nice bit of colour in the clouds, but you wish that that colour was just a little bit stronger? The good news is there is a technique that solves this, and it's probably the simplest technique I've ever seen, used or taught. It's honestly ridiculous the bang for your buck that you can get from using this technique. So let me show you how you can do it in literally just a few seconds. To start, add an empty layer to your image in Photoshop and set its blend mode to overlay, and then grab the brush tool, hold Alt or Option on the keyboard to turn the mouse into a color picker, and then click on a color in the good bit of the sky that you want to sample and kind of replicate. Then make the brush quite big, set its opacity to 30% and a 0% hardness, and brush with this sampled color into the sky just a little bit across like this. Now see how the color is now spreading across the sky into the not so colorful clouds in this example. It looks pretty good, but it still kind of looks like you've just brushed a color across the sky, right? But with just 2 extra clicks of the mouse, you can add a mask that restricts the effect to the lighter areas, just like in the earlier examples, and suddenly the painted color looks perfectly blended. Now you could do all this awesome layer masking the Adobe way without my luminosity masking plugin, but if you want to make life 10 times easier for yourself, then you can get the plugin for free on the link in the description and pinned comment. Or if you're one of the 30% of people who watch my videos on a TV, then just scan this code with your phone to get it.